but also trying to work as a group of people to make terrorism less impactful and less successful. If you've been through something like we all have, what that does is it gives you this deep and abiding sense that you want to make sure that terrorism doesn't succeed in its objectives. So those are the two things that we spend our time trying to influence.
The face of the terrorist in Liverpool is splashed on most front pages today. What's your response to that? How does that make you feel?
What we know from the evidence is that one of the reasons that these attacks happen isn't just ideological. Sometimes it is, but it isn't normally just ideological. It's also personal. And that one of the personal motivations for these people that commit these horrific attacks is for notoriety, is for fame, is for significance. That in a lot of cases, these individuals had either troubled lives or very lonely and isolated lives where they didn't feel that they had the recognition. One of the reasons that they'd often join extremist networks is for that sense of connection and belonging within that extremist group. And then a key desire is for that moment of wider recognition. They want that notoriety. They want to be famous. The reason that they take part in these attacks, as I say, is not just ideological. It's that desire for personal notoriety. So we might think that when we are putting their faces on our front pages, that is demonstrating how awful they are, but it is exactly playing into their hands. It is what they want. And again, as families who have been bereaved or as families that have survived terror attacks, the key thing that we want to do is to make sure that terrorism is less effective, that we don't play into their hands. And I think all too often in the media coverage, we put their names out. Sometimes we publish their manifestos. Sometimes we even publish their videos with IS, Islamic State, for example. Their videos that they were putting out about people being beheaded or people being burnt to death, these horrific videos, we were then sharing, perhaps, blacked out at critical moments, but we were doing their job of propaganda for them. And I think it's time that we stopped that. The media organisations took those basic steps. Now, of course, there is the completely legitimate public interest. People have a right to know what happened, why it happened, what we know about it. But that's different than playing into the hands of terrorists by sharing their ideology, by dividing our communities and giving those individual terrorists the notoriety that they crave.
Professor Chris Frost, the chair of the Ethics Council of the National Union of Journalists, has said while the NUJ, the National Union of Journalists, is sympathetic to the survivors' concern, many of the report's recommendations, because you produced a report last month, I believe, many of the report's recommendations are unrealistic and a danger to freedom of speech. How do you respond to that?
We've had lots of very, very positive response. I'm not sure that the NUJ always speak for all of their members. We've had really positive reactions from existing editors, from former editors. Former editor of The Sun, for example, was on the Today programme talking about that report and saying it is time that we change some of these practices. And of course, we're not calling for limits on freedom of speech at all. We're not calling for this to be the law, that it to be illegal. What we are calling for is for journalists to use their judgment about when do you move from informing the public about what happened into sharing and promoting ideology. When do you move from telling people why something happened into giving that person the notoriety? So, of course, we're not suggesting for a second that these attacks aren't reported on. It's absolutely critical that they are. But that's not the same as putting their faces on the front pages of our newspapers day after day. That is what they want. And at the moment, it is what we're doing. And that can change. It's not a breach of press freedom for journalists to make that editorial decision. And in fact, if you look at several cases recently, if you look at the high-profile murder case recently, what happened there was that people decided to stop naming the former police officer who committed that attack. In New Zealand, you had the Prime Minister, following the attack, that horrific attack, on a couple of mosques there, again making the same decision not to name that individual, not to keep repeating their names. Similarly, in the US, you've got CNN making the judgment not to name the killers or the shooters in school shootings because, again, of that personal notoriety. Le Monde are now doing the same in France. So this is something which media organisations are already thinking about. Some are already moving on, and we think there are ways of doing that in a way which still enables journalists to do their job, their vital job of informing the public, reporting on these things that are in the public interest, but aren't promoting the terrorist ideology and aren't giving them the notoriety that they crave.
Let's go back to your own experience of being a survivor, your own terrible loss. You are in shock. You are in grief in the immediate days after your loss, after the murder of your loved one. You're worrying about your children. Do you also have 1,000 media outlets getting in touch, wanting to interview you?
Yes, and the reality is on this that in those first... So we did this survey and we asked survivors if they had experienced any media intrusion. Over 60% of people said that they had, and the vast majority of that happened within the first 48 hours. And if you imagine in that first 48 hours, you're in the process of telling your loved ones that your partner or your brother or sister or whoever it is has died. You are in the middle of identifying their bodies. In some cases, you're waiting for news from the hospital about whether they are going to make it or not. And in that context, to have people constantly knocking on your door or messaging you through social media or calling you up, individually as a journalist, you might not think that that has much impact. But if you are getting call after call after call, I was speaking to somebody who lost their child in the Manchester Arena attack. And while they were waiting for a call from the police to let them know whether their loved one was safe or not, had been caught up and ultimately died in the attack, they were getting call after call from withheld numbers. And so they were answering every single one of those calls, hoping it was their child calling them from the hospital, hoping that it was the police with good news. And every time it was a journalist. Now, that's not about journalists being evil or nasty, but it is about a system which creates such a huge amount of volume that for the individuals involved, it becomes oppressive. The taxi driver in the attack that we've just been hearing about in Liverpool has already called on media organisations to stop intruding. They had, I think, people knocking on their door at 10 o'clock at night, and that's not respectful of those individuals and what they're having to go through. And yes, of course, those individuals should have the right to tell their story, and journalists, of course, should be able to contact them. But why not, one of the recommendations we made in the report, why not have a 48-hour period where there is that opportunity just for those people who are going through hell to be able to collect their thoughts and pull themselves together and to look after their family? And
finally, David Amos's funeral is next week. That must bring back terrible memories of your own loss. How do we stop another family suffering in the way that yours and David Amos's have, both murdered, attending a constituency surgery?
Yeah, when I heard about David's killing, it obviously brought everything back for our family and for my kids, and just the horror of what they're going through and will still be going through. I said at the time that the public response to things really does matter. In our case, in the aftermath around Joe's funeral, my son was in the car as we were on the way to the funeral, and there were thousands of people lining the route and throwing flowers onto the car. And he said, I knew that people love Mummy, but I didn't realise that this many people did. And that has a soothing effect on those people that are going through that pain and that grief. But also then, if you take it, that's something that we can all be part of doing. The broader role that we can all play, I think, is to make terrorism less successful, to not do what terrorists want. Because if we make it less successful and less impactful, then less people will do it because it's less of a viable strategy. So that means when they want to divide us, we should pull together. Their strategy is to turn community against community. If you're advocating for that, if you're driving that, if you're blaming all right-wingers for the attack on Joe, if you're blaming all Muslims for the attack on David Amis, you are doing what terrorists want you to do. And the media organisations, if you are giving them that infamy, if you are sharing their image, if you're putting that on the front pages every day, again, you are falling into what they want you to do. If you are sharing their ideology and explaining what it was they wanted this attack to achieve, then again, you're in the position of making terrorism more successful. So there are things that all of us as individuals can do, and none of that will do, the amazing work of the security services and the police in stopping individual attacks. But what it can do is, in the margin, shift the balance and make terrorism less successful, less impactful, and therefore we hope over time something that occurs less and less, so that fewer families have to go through what mine have and what David Amis's have and what many others, unfortunately, across our country have.
Brendan Cox, founder of Survivors Against Terror. Thank you very much indeed for talking to us today. Thank you. After the break, we're talking floods with the MP who says the rules around flood prevention are a mess and need to be overhauled. Before that, let's take a look at the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Another largely cloudy day out there. A bit of brightness here and there, but most places staying fairly dull. There's some wet weather crossing Scotland. Also pretty windy here as well. The isobars squeezing together close to this little area of low pressure. Further south, high pressure is nearby. There's a week-old weather front. This one, though, is a little more lively, and it is bringing rain, not just to Scotland, actually, but for a time we're going to see a spell of rain crossing Northern Ireland, but it should peter out through the afternoon. Meanwhile, across Scotland, the rain will continue across western areas. The east may not see much of that rain until late on, but it is very blustery as well. Further south, the winds are light. That old weather front may be providing a bit of drizzle here and there, but generally dry, but fairly dull, but mild, with temperatures again climbing into the teens. Through this evening, we'll see a bit of that rain just trickling into northern England, maybe across parts of Wales before it fizzles out. Lots of showers then coming into Scotland, a few for Northern Ireland, staying blustery here as well. A bit of snow on the tops of the mountains across Scotland. But elsewhere, the skies tend to clear and it turns a bit chilly. Temperatures well down into single figures. But it does make for a brighter day tomorrow, certainly for most of England and Wales. A few showers, certainly early on over northwest England, and showers will keep going through the day across western Scotland. A few for Northern Ireland as well, but many areas here will be dry, and certainly across much of the southern half of the UK, it's a dry, fine day with decent spells of sunshine, a bit of a breeze and a slightly cooler feel, but still these temperatures are pretty close to average for the time of year. Through Wednesday evening, we'll start to see a bit more cloud spilling into Northern Ireland, turning a little bit damp and drizzly, and that rain will push into western Scotland, where it will linger through much of the rest of this week, through Thursday and Friday as well. But elsewhere, staying largely dry through the rest of this week. Lots of cloud around, and again, it's going to turn milder, but perhaps things turning colder through the weekend.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage. I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
If you've ever had your house flooded, you'll know what a nightmare it can be, and also trying to get insurance for homeowners who live in affected areas is incredibly difficult. Well, one MP is trying to change the law today. It is Emma Hardy, the Labour MP for Hull West and Hessle, who joins me now. Emma.
Hi, good morning.
Hello, Emma. Nice to see you. Just tell us about how you are trying to change the law today, if you would.
So briefly, what's happened is we've seen with COP26 that the global temperatures are rising, and that it's going to be inevitable that we're going to see more freak weather incidents and more flooding. Now, the area I represent had devastating floods in 2007, which utterly destroyed so many people's homes, cost an absolute fortune, and they're still remembered today as an incredibly traumatic experience. So what I'm trying to do in terms of changing the law is that some people have been able to put in some flood mitigation measures, some measures to try and make their homes more flood-proof, but yet still they're paying for extremely expensive home insurance. So one of the things I want to do is to say to the insurance companies, if people are doing things to make their homes more flood-proof, then surely they should have cheaper insurance because of it. But also changing the rule nationally, because in Hull, because we flood so often, our council are really strict about planning laws. If you're going to build a new house in Hull, they're really strict about what you have to do to prevent flooding if you're going to build it. But that's not the same everywhere else, and it feels quite unfair because Hull is like a basin and the water comes running in from elsewhere parts of the country, and it doesn't seem to be particularly fair on areas like Hull which are prone to flooding. So we need to change the rules for everybody. Make every council, wherever you live in the UK, be really strict about when you build a new home, you've got to have flood prevention measures.
Existing homes, wouldn't it be expensive to make the modifications that are needed?
It will be quite expensive. I mean, one of the things I've not addressed in this bill is to sort of something I'd like to go on and talk to the government about is looking at grants to enable people to put flood prevention measures into their existing homes. You're quite right, because it would be quite expensive as it stands at the moment. So this bill is really focusing on new builds. So anywhere where you're going to build a new property, we've got to change it. And some of the examples I give is looking at plug sockets and electrical wiring are higher up within homes. So if homes do get flooded, it doesn't wreck all of the electrics at the same time. Looking at this thing called SUDs, which are quite exciting, really. They're called, well, exciting in my opinion, sustainable urban drainage systems, which are looking at creating pockets of land which are designed to hold floodwater to stop them going to different homes and different houses in local areas. So there's loads of different things we can do to try and hold water and keep water away from homes. And I think planners need to be thinking about this. If they're going to build a new estate somewhere, one of the main things they need to be thinking about is, okay, we're going to stick this as a new estate somewhere. What are we going to do with all that water that used to soak into the ground? Where is that water going to go now? And how can we stop that water running off into other areas and flooding different areas in the vicinity?
And just finally, if buildings continue, if homes continue to be built in the same way as they have always been, what are the implications of that?
Well, if we don't adapt to the changing climate, if we don't adapt to the changing weather, then we're going to see more homes flooding. And when you go and visit families who've had their homes flooded, it is devastating. We're not talking nice, clean water coming down from the sky. We're talking sewerage water. We're talking water that gets stuck in the sewage system and comes up into people's homes. It is utterly devastating. People lose everything. Everything has to be ripped out and replaced. So we can't continue in the way we did before. We can't continue to design our homes for the past. We need to be looking at the future, making them flood-proof, making them flood resilient so that we can continue to live in beautiful areas like the city of Hull for a lot longer, because otherwise we're going to find that certain parts of the country we're no longer able to build any homes in because of flooding.
Emma Hardy, pleasure to talk to you about the law you're trying to get changed today. Good luck with that and thanks for your time. Coming up in the show, as MPs prepare to debate the row over second jobs for a second time, we'll have the latest.
Hello, I'm Simon Pusey. Here are the latest news headlines. Former Yorkshire County cricketer Azim Rafiq says racism in cricket is worse than in society. He's been appearing before MPs to discuss allegations of institutional racism at the club. An investigation by Yorkshire concluded Mr Rafiq was a victim of racial harassment and bullying, but nobody was disciplined. The club's former chairman, Roger Hutton, who quit in the aftermath of the row, will also give evidence to the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Committee. Manchester City footballer Benjamin Mendy has been charged with 2 additional counts of rape. The 27-year-old is now facing 6 counts and 1 of sexual assault, which relate to 4 people over the age of 16. NHS organisations have been asked to review their security arrangements after the Liverpool terrorist attack. The 4 men arrested in relation to the taxi explosion have now all been released from police custody. The bombing suspect who died in Sunday's car blast has been named as 32-year-old Emad Al-Swel Alim. The driver, David Perry, escaped with minor injuries. The terrorism threat level in the UK has now been increased to severe, meaning an attack is highly likely. French police have evacuated migrants from a makeshift camp near Dunkirk. At least 1,500 people have been living in a makeshift camp there for the past 6 months, hoping to cross to Britain. The French Interior Minister also says that a network of smugglers have been dismantled in the region, with 13 people detained. Obesity levels among younger children rose significantly after lockdown. That's the latest from the National Childhood Measurement Programme. Official figures show that now almost 1 in 7 children start primary school obese, and more than 1 in a quarter are obese when they finish primary school. NHS leaders are calling for social care staff to be given cash bonuses to stop them leaving other jobs in the winter. They want the government to offer £500 incentives so they don't take Christmas work in hospitality, supermarkets or firms like Amazon. The sector already has more than 100,000 vacancies. Well, you're right up to date for now. I'll be back with more of today's news stories at the top of the hour.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, if Boris Johnson thought the sleaze row was going away anytime soon, he'll be sadly disappointed. The fallout from the Owen Paterson debacle rumbles on. A mess created largely, as he admits, by the Prime Minister himself. And last night, a motion to undo some of the mess was blocked by, and you really could hardly make this up, a Conservative MP. Well, to make sense of all of this, if that is even possible, we are joined now by our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, who's in Westminster for us. Tom, I can't get my head around this. Just explain to us what happened last night as the government tried to put this issue to bed and undo the damage.
Absolutely right. The government tried to sort of waft through, without a vote, a reversion to the status quo ante before this whole mess was begun, quite frankly, by the government's own actions. Of course, if we take our minds back to over 2 weeks ago now, Owen Paterson was recommended for a suspension by the Standards Committee, a 30-day suspension. I mean, many MPs in the House of Commons have been suspended for similar amounts of time. It's a punishment, but it's by no means the largest punishment that you could possibly be bestowed. And yet, a massive stink was kicked up about this. The Andrea Leadsom amendment was laid down that would sort of set up this parallel committee, halt the process, change everything, change the standards process. The government backed that, and then it all blew up a day later. It seemed like the government was trying to change the rules to protect one of its own. Well, the government's been trying to put that episode, that sorry episode that sparked 2 weeks really of sleaze stories of the Tories sliding in the polls. Really, they've shot themselves in their own foot over this process. And that was all attempted to be put behind them yesterday, except for Christopher Chope MP, the Conservative MP, the veteran Conservative MP, who shouted object when it came to nod through that motion. Now, to be fair to Christopher Chope, he says that whenever he shouts object, and he has shouted object over many issues in the past, and that forces a debate before a vote can be held. He's come under so much criticism in the past for shouting object over motions that many people would think no one would want to object to. For example, the honouring of Alan Turing. For example, the motions to make upskirting, that offence, illegal. There have been many things that Christopher Chope has shouted object to, but his argument is that he wants everything to be debated in the House of Commons before it goes to a vote, and he objects to the principle of something being nodded through without a proper debate beforehand. So that arcane parliamentary procedure of shouting object, literally shouting object in the House of Commons last night has led to a 1-hour debate being found time for today, and that will be starting, we believe, at the top of the next hour.
Conservative MPs must be absolutely furious with their colleague Christopher Chope. Labour MPs rubbing their hands together with glee, no doubt.
Certainly, I've spoken to many Conservative MPs today who are aghast, who are appalled, who think, what on earth is this man doing? Who, one of them said to me, sort of, it seems like Christopher Chope is playing for the other side. He's an asset to Sir Keir Starmer. Now, Christopher Chope would say he's just being entirely principled, but my goodness, what a principle to lay down, especially when there have been some motions that have been nodded through without a vote in the past that he hasn't objected to. Now, he may well have his own logistical reasons for that rather than principled ones, but it does seem incredibly curious, and it's hard to overstate the raw amount of anger within the Conservative Party last night because of this. One suggestion even that there may be a move to deselect Christopher Chope from his constituency after this move. People are pretty fed up with it. Conservative MPs who've been seeing the Conservative poll lead evaporate over the last 2 weeks, who saw this as an opportunity to finally put this behind them, to move on to talk about the issues they want to talk about, to stop dragging up this issue of alleged corruption that the Labour Party keeps talking about. Well, Christopher Chope has enabled the Labour Party to talk about it for quite a while longer in this debate coming up now.
And tomorrow, the Labour Party will force a vote in the House of Commons calling for a ban for MPs on most second jobs. So the Tory MPs, the Tory whips, party managers, they have to decide how to respond to that debate tomorrow in Parliament.
That's absolutely right. Now, there's a bit of a tricky conundrum for the Conservative government at the moment because these opposition day motions are not always binding. And what has been happening in the last few years, really, is that on opposition day motions, the Conservative Party encourages its MPs to abstain, because if the vote isn't binding in the first place, they don't affect the outcome. They don't want the bad PR of being made to vote against something that's designed to make them look bad. There are question marks, though, over what the wording of the motion tomorrow will be, over how Labour will construct it, and whether Labour can construct it in a way that is binding. That means that the government has not announced its response to this potential legislation and will not until it has seen the wording of that motion. And we're expecting that wording to come out a little bit later on. Keir Starmer is holding a press conference at 3:30 to explain exactly what it is that the Labour Party want to propose. The words that we've been hearing are that the Labour Party want to ban paid directorships for MPs, people who sit on boards and as directors of companies. So that's not to ban, for example, the MPs who write books or are GPs or do sort of socially useful jobs that many people would argue enhance their roles as MPs. Although the question is, how is the Labour Party going to spin this successfully as being an MP is a full-time job when, of course, they're leaving so many exemptions in what we expect to be their proposed legislation. So it does leave quite a few gaps, really, that the Labour Party will have to answer at their press conference later today.
And I think I'm right in saying that we will get some changes to the rules for how MPs, or recommendations for how MPs should behave, which are more independent from the Standards Committee. Any idea when we will see those and when we will get those and what they might say?
Well, there have been several reviews, and there is generally a sense of urgency in terms of changing exactly what the recommendations are for members. Many members feeling like they have been behaving within the rules and yet have been targeted by the press over the last 2 weeks. Of course, there are many MPs who earn considerable amounts of money outside of their job as an MP, but who see that it is within the rules. So potentially updated recommendations might be a slight fix there. But of course, it is true that for many MPs, being an MP is a part-time job. For example, the Prime Minister is an MP. He represents the people of Uxbridge and South Ruislip in London. However, I think it's unarguable to say he probably spends more of his time being the Prime Minister than being a constituency MP. And the same is true of Sir Keir Starmer. He definitely spends more time as the leader of the Labour Party, travelling the country campaigning for Labour politicians, than he does serving his constituents in Holborn. So the question is, to what extent do we accept that an MP is a part-time role for some people, or expect that being an MP should be a full-time role for other people. And there has been a lot of ambiguity, and there have been different interpretations of this across many members. And I think one of the biggest inequalities really in the House of Commons tends to be those MPs who are in marginal seats, who have wafer-thin majorities, whose seats flip at various elections, who feel like they need to be stronger constituency MPs and doing much more work in their constituencies. And then you have, on the other hand, the MPs of all parties who sit on enormous majorities in very safe seats and feel like they can get away with doing quite a lot outside of their role of being an MP.
Let me give a shout out to those marginal seat MPs, having been one of them with 2 out of my 3 elections with majorities of less than 500. Now, the Labour Party are clearly running with this issue, but is there a danger that the public just think it's a plague in all your houses, you're all as bad as each other? Is that a risk for politics, really?
I think potentially the Labour Party made a misstep. When was it? A week and a half ago now, when they tried to broaden this conversation. What was a pretty damning conversation about one Conservative MP who had been found to have done wrong by the Standards Committee, who had been found to have been a paid lobbyist and breached the rules in that way. They broadened the conversation out to become one of envy and jealousy politics. So, for example, those MPs who totally within the rules act as lawyers, for example, as Keir Starmer did when he started to be an MP, earning over £100,000 in his first 6 years as an MP, doing outside legal work, suddenly dragging all of those jobs into the conversation that was just about lobbying suddenly drags many more MPs from many more parties into the conversation. And to some extent, this may have been a misstep for the Labour Party, because there are many Labour MPs who, of course, have outside earnings, as well as Conservative MPs who have outside earnings. And so this conversation becoming broader, and as you rightly say, becoming a plague on all your houses, might be a less pertinent political attack. So it will be really interesting to see how the Labour leader frames this debate as they try and move the conversation forwards, as they try and set the terms of the debate, set those parameters for debate later on today. So as I say, that press conference from Sir Keir Starmer will be at 3:30 p.m. This afternoon, and we'll see exactly what he has to say then.
Tom Harwood, it's always a pleasure to get the benefit of your wisdom. Thank you, as ever. Now, another issue that has caused consternation amongst the public and many MPs is the practice of discharging raw sewage into watercourses. MPs were heavily criticised last month for voting through measures that will let water companies continue to pump sewage into our rivers. But the water companies argue it's a necessary evil to prevent sewage backing up Victorian sewers and flooding streets and homes. Now, a public petition calling for a ban has received over 111,000 signatures. So the issue was debated again yesterday in Parliament. Joining me now is Antoniazzi. You wouldn't believe that I'm also Italian. The Labour MP for Gower, who led yesterday's debate. Tonya, the government are, they're making progress. Give them some credit.
They are making progress, and that's absolutely fantastic, but they only made progress because of the public outcry that we've had. And, this petition was set up and the government responded to it last May. So I think it's, it's not been good enough, and they have to go further. And that was what was great. And the petitions are brilliant because they bring the minister into Westminster Hall and they have to respond. That is so key. I mean, my constituents are absolutely outraged. I get loads of mail and complaints, and even when I knock on doors, it's like, well, what are you going to do about the sewage? Because I couldn't go swimming in the sea. And everybody enjoys going outdoors now, even more so since COVID, and it's just highlighted the impact and their ability to get out in the fresh air, which is what they want to do, and enjoy nature. So was really, really delighted to be able to lead on this debate, because our water is the dirtiest water in Europe. We have to be pressing the government to be, getting the water authorities to be checking it more often. The environmental agency, they need more money. They need to have that funding behind them. And also we need to be working together as the whole of the United Kingdom, because one of the things the minister said, well, this is devolved. Well, yes, it is, but this is a UK-wide issue and rivers have no boundaries, and we need to be working together in order for the water quality across the United Kingdom to be better.
And I just want to go back to a point that you made. When the public sign these petitions and get that debate by over 100,000 members of the public demanding that debate in Parliament, the minister does have to respond. What did the minister say last night?
Well, she said that we're doing more and that we're working in the right direction. One of the things the minister is very enthusiastic, and she also called and said that there was a lot of misinformation out there and that they'd been bombarded on social media and a lot of it was unfair and untrue. And I just think, well, that pushed you in the right direction. So these petitions are absolutely brilliant for that reason, to put pressure on the government. They don't like it, obviously, it hurts them and they feel it's unfair and unjust. But if it has its aim, then, it's better for everybody. And yeah, I think they are moving in the right direction. Can they do better? Yes, they can. The water companies have to take more responsibility. There need to be more prosecutions. There needs to be more checking on the water quality. And we've asked for that, and we need them to, put out their plan earlier. They're talking about having their plan out in 2022. Well, we need it now. We need it early 2022, not late 2022. And everything, we always seem to be waiting for things. And, people don't want to wait. They want to see change happen and happen now.
And finally, I was looking at what some of the Conservative MPs said who voted against the opposition amendment when it was put. One MP, Robbie Moore, said that the amendment would have led to massively increased water bills for us all. Is he right?
Well, we could be looking at water bills and saying, well, what do they do in Wales? We have a not-for-profit organisation in Welsh Water where the money goes actually into solving problems and dealing with issues like this, rather than into the hands of the shareholders. So, it is the people that are paying for it in England. Well, that's not what we want. We want to keep bills lower. We want to be efficient. Well, let's look at different ways of delivering that, and let's look at maybe, nationalising the water companies again, because that was a catastrophe when it happened, and we may need to move that way. And they've got to look at can-do options now, not can't do, and stop whinging and get on with it.
Tonya Antionazzi, everyone can see where you are the MP for from the Gower. Thank you very much indeed for your time today. Thank you. Thank you for getting in touch today on terrorism. Dawn emails. It's important to always show the picture of the terrorists for at least one day for us to see. The reason being because the public needs to see that ordinary-looking people can still be the evil ones in order for us to remain vigilant out here. On the issue of flooding, Don says, when you build a village in an area called Fish Lake and then, as the locals report, you stop dredging the local river to protect nesting newts and toads in the riverbank, you could well see flooding of homes, as we saw when Boris visited a while back. On the same subject, Carl says the relevant councils know exactly where the floodplains are in this country, and they have continued to give planning permission. Apologies for my slightly croaky voice today. That blooming cold is coming back to get me, but I've enjoyed the pleasure of your company. I've enjoyed talking to all of our guests. Of course, tomorrow is Prime Minister's Questions time. We will have a Conservative MP and a Labour MP, as we usually do. So join us for that. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. The show is back every weekday from noon. Up next, it's On the Money with Liam Halligan. Then I'll be with Liam, if I can still speak, between 2 and 3. Thank you for bearing with me. For now, I will leave you with your weather forecast.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Another largely cloudy day out there. A bit of brightness here and there, but most places staying fairly dull. There's some wet weather crossing Scotland. Also pretty windy here as well. The isobars squeezing together close to this little area of low pressure. Further south, high pressure is nearby. There's a week-old weather front. This one, though, is a little more lively and it is bringing rain, not just to Scotland, actually, but for a time. We're going to see a spell of rain crossing Northern Ireland, but it should peter out through the afternoon. Meanwhile, across Scotland, the rain will continue across western areas. The east may not see much of that rain until late on, but it is very blustery as well. Further south, the winds are light. That old weather front may be providing a bit of drizzle here and there, but generally dry, but fairly dull, but mild, with temperatures again climbing into the teens. Through this evening, we'll see a bit of that rain just trickling into northern England, maybe across parts of Wales before it fizzles out. Lots of showers then coming into Scotland, a few for Northern Ireland, staying blustery here as well. A bit of snow on the tops of the mountains across Scotland. But elsewhere, the skies tend to clear and it turns a bit chilly. Temperatures well down into single figures. But it does make for a brighter day tomorrow, certainly for most of England and Wales. A few showers, certainly early on over northwest England, and showers will keep going through the day across western Scotland. A few for Northern Ireland as well, but many areas here will be dry, and certainly across much of the southern half of the UK, it's a dry, fine day with decent spells of sunshine, a bit of a breeze and a slightly cooler feel, but still these temperatures are pretty close to average for the time of year. Through Wednesday evening, we'll start to see a bit more cloud spilling into Northern Ireland, turning a little bit damp and drizzly, and that rain will push into western Scotland, where it will linger through much of the rest of this week, through Thursday and Friday as well. But elsewhere, staying largely dry through the rest of this week. Lots of cloud around, and again, it's going to turn milder, but perhaps things turning colder through the weekend.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Join me, Alex Phillips, for the afternoon agenda on GB News, Monday to Thursday from 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. We don't lecture to you or try to tell you what to think. We do a deep delve into a topic with views from across the range of debate, therefore leaving you, the viewer, to make up your own mind. Join me, Alex Phillips, for the afternoon agenda on GB News, 4 till 6, Monday to Thursday. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
And welcome once again to On the Money. It's your daily weekday dose of economics, business and consumer news. I'm Liam Halligan, and for the next hour, we'll be talking about the soaring costs of rent as rental costs rise at their fastest pace for 13 years. Not much fun for so-called generation rent, those young adults struggling to buy a home. Plus, we'll be talking with one of the UK's leading nuclear physicists. Yes! But first, it's the GB News headlines with Simon Pusey.
Thanks, Liam. Yes, I am Simon Pusey. This is your news at 1 o'clock. Former Yorkshire County cricketer Azeem Rafiq says racism in cricket is worse than in society. He appeared before MPs to discuss allegations of institutional racism at the Yorkshire County Cricket Club. An investigation by Yorkshire concluded Mr Rafiq was a victim of racial harassment and bullying, but nobody was disciplined. Mr Rafiq told the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee that abuse in the club went unchecked.
Racism is not banter. And for a person of colour, I think there's 3 people of colour on that panel, and one of them, Chief Executive, I think he's associated with National Asian Cricket Council and CEO of London Tigers, an award-winning charity organisation working with rugby and football clubs. For him to come out and do an article where he stands by the finding that was used as banter, it just shows the scale of the problem we have.
NHS organisations have been asked to review their security arrangements after the Liverpool terrorist attack. The 4 men arrested in relation to the taxi explosion have now been released from police custody. The bombing suspect, who died in Sunday's blast, has been named as 32-year-old Ahmad al-Swalalman. The driver, David Perry, survived the incident and has since been discharged from hospital. The terrorism threat level in the UK has been increased to severe, meaning an attack is highly likely. Minister for Security and Borders, Damien Hines, told GB News people should be as vigilant as possible.
If you see something that doesn't look right, something that makes you suspicious about something, just to go that extra mentally, go that extra distance to say, yeah, I should report that. And if it turns out to not be significant, then nothing's been lost.
Manchester City footballer Benjamin Mendy has been charged with 2 additional counts of rape. The 27-year-old is now facing 6 counts and 1 of sexual assault, which relate to 4 people over the age of 16. He'll appear at Stockport Magistrates Court tomorrow. French police have evacuated migrants from a makeshift camp near Dunkirk.